to our final lawyer seminar for the year. My name is Belinda Edmondson. I'm one of the co-chairs, the co-organizers of the Sawyer Seminar Series. For those of you who are new, the Sawyer Seminar is a series of seminars that we have been running over the past year to explore issues of immigration, race, and inequality. So we were generously funded by the Mellon Foundation to run the series, and it's a seminar series, so we're here to learn. We're here to educate. I'm glad to see the students. Please ask questions. So the first seminar was last September this time on anti-Asian violence. Then we had one on nativism and immigrant communities. Then we had one on refugees as the cultural producers of art and music. And we had one on Black citizenship, which was about the relationship to citizenship between native-born Black people and immigrant Black populations. And this is the final seminar on immigration and education access, which, as many of you know, is a very important point for us and a very important value for us here at Rutgers University in New York. Before we begin, I just want to thank a few people now that we're at the end of the road. So a lot of people to thank. First of all, I want to thank my co-organizers, Kornel Chang, who is the chair of history and an awesome historian who will be leading the discussion today. I also want to thank Sean Mitchell, who is the chair of sociology anthropology and an awesome anthropologist. I want to thank Pete Rosario, who is the CEO and president of La Casa de Pedro, which is a Latinx serving nonprofit organization that will be tabling today. I want to thank Lauren Whitaker of the Office of Disability Services, which will also be tabling today. So those of you who can take advantage, who need these services or know people who need these services, please take advantage. Gary Santos Mendoza, Priyanka Baranwaj, and the Intercultural Resource Center, which is home to undocumented student services and LGBTQ student services. Our thanks to Nora Longo and Isaac Jimenez of the communications team. There is Nora for the live stream support, because we are being live streamed. Last but not least, the Office of Reservations, Gwen Thomas and the Express Newark team. This is Express Newark, everybody. It's a great arts incubator that brings together Rutgers and the surrounding community. Daisy Rivera and the catering staff at Gourmet Dining. So thank you, everyone. I also want to send out particular thanks to Bernie Lombardi. Wave your hand. Bernie, postdoctoral associate who has guided us through this year. And where's Christina Strasburger? There she is. She's awesome. We all know Christina runs everything. Mihian, we don't even need me. Mihian, Esperanza Santos, and our awesome graduate students. Ileana Smith, who graduated from the MA program in English last year and is a first-year PhD student at NYU, is here. Where's there you are? There's Ileana. To come to see the work to its end. So thank you for coming, everybody. But last but not least, I want to thank our panelists, Jason Hernandez of the Rutgers Immigrant Community Assistance Project. Jason works in the law school, especially developing this area of particular importance to our community, and they will be tabling here. Pedro Rosario, as I said, a CEO of La Casa de Pedro, which will also be tabling. Most of all, perhaps, I would like to thank our Chancellor, Nancy Cantor. So, I'd like to say a few words about this topic, institutionalizing change, and the role of the Chancellor in helping us to realize this vision. So institutionalizing change is the culmination of the seminar series. You know, we've been exploring issues of immigration, race, inequality, and finally, what we want to know is how do we turn these insights into action? How do we turn scholarship into action? How do we change the structures of our lives so that they reflect the things we know to be right and true? And we could not have done this without the visionary leadership, frankly, of Nancy Cantor, who has been our chancellor since 2014, and she has done extraordinary things. We have students who are, maybe a third of our population is 1/3 first generation college students. They have a very high, I should say we have a very high graduation rate, far higher than the national average. We have migrant students, undocumented students, high graduation rates. We do the work. So if higher education is about social mobility, we do the work. We get students where they need to go. And that is the vision of Nancy Cantor. So I really want to give it up to our chancellor, who will be in conversation today with Kornel, Chang, with Pedro, Rosario, with Jason Hernandez, about what it means to give educational access to our students who come from many different backgrounds, and especially from backgrounds of first and second generation immigrant. That's particularly important for me as an immigrant myself, and for people who do not have the kinds of access that many college students do. So this is about how to make that change happen structurally. And I'm very excited about this conversation. So please join me in welcoming the panel and thanking them all. Please come up.
See. I'll get started. Good morning, everybody. It's good to see everyone. As Belinda mentioned, I'm Kornel Chang, Associate Professor and Chair of the History Department, and it really is my pleasure to be discussing and my pleasure to introduce our distinguished panelists. And so I know that Belinda gave a few words about them. I'm going to give them a much more formal introduction, which I think is important. So I'm going to start with Pedro Rosario, who's on the far right. So Pedro Rosario is President and Chief Executive Officer of La Casa de Don Pedro, New Jersey's largest Latinx nonprofit serving Greater Newark's most resilient Black and Brown community. Pedro leads and serves with La Casa's 280 employees, who collectively impact upwards of 50,000 people per year through programs that foster self-sufficiency, empowerment, and neighborhood revitalization. As La Casa celebrates its 50th anniversary in 2022, Pedro's highest priorities include racial and social justice, affordable home ownership, high-quality early childhood education, and addressing the ongoing impact of COVID-19 that continues to disproportionately impact BIPOC communities. Peter. Next to Peter is Jason Hernandez. Jason Hernandez is a 2011 graduate of Beasley School of Law at Temple University. He joined Rutgers Law School in August 2017, hired as an immigrant rights attorney to found the Rutgers Immigrant Community Assistance Project, RICAP. Jason manages Rutgers' free and confidential campus-based immigration legal service that provides advice, counsel, and direct representation to students currently enrolled throughout the university. RICAP, recap, okay, the recap. Recap advocates aims to empower the immigrant community through educational presentation, community engagement programs, and legal advisory. As a campus resource, ReCap provides subject matter expertise and advises campus leadership on the ever-shifting federal and state immigration law and policy landscape. Especially important today, and we'll get to that. And then finally, of course, not least, Nancy Cantor. Nancy Cantor is Chancellor of Rutgers University. Okay, yeah. So that's Nancy, our Chancellor. Let me introduce one other person who was supposed to be here. Roberto Gonzalez, who is a legal expert and a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, was supposed to join us. Unfortunately, his train was canceled and can't be with us today. So I'm going to introduce him because he did just like 10 minutes ago email me an answer to a question I really wanted him to respond to. So let me just give you his bio, and then when I read you his response, you will know who he is and why his words carry weight. Roberto G. Gonzalez is the Richard Perry University Professor at the University of Pennsylvania with appointments in the Department of Sociology and the Graduate School of Education. His research focuses on factors that shape and reduce economic, legal, and social inequalities among vulnerable and hard-to-reach youth populations as they transition to adulthood. He is an active public scholar and has advised on a broad range of stakeholders in the private and public sectors, has briefed members of the U.S. Congress, and has testified on matters of immigration policy before the U.S. Senate. He has also written opinion pieces for the New York Times, Washington Post, Boston Globe, and The Guardian, and is often quoted in the popular media. At Penn, Professor Gonzalez is the founding director of the newly formed Penn Migration Initiative, a university-wide effort aimed at advancing and promoting interdisciplinary scholarship and intellectual exchange around issues of immigration policy and immigrant community. Okay. So let me set the stage for the first question. It's hard to believe, but the first DREAM Act was introduced by Congressman Luis Gutierrez in, I think, 2001, right? It was before 9/11. So it's been over 20 years since it was first introduced, and obviously it has not passed. And for that matter, no immigration reform has been passed over the last 3 decades. But during that time, local organizations and groups like yourselves have tried to fill the void as best they can. And so I guess the first question would be, thinking about maybe telling the audience the kinds of work that your institutions, organizations, groups have done to support, to support dreamers, refugees, and other vulnerable immigrant students is the question. And I guess one of the, in doing so, and this is your choice, maybe if you can sort of personalize it a little bit and think about like, when was the moment you were like, oh, this isn't happening. We need to step up and do something here, right? Because the fact of the matter is, immigration is generally an area for the federal government to act, right? The courts have ruled that the federal government has plenary power or absolute power over the issue of immigration. And so this was in some ways a remarkable moment of local groups kind of stepping in a moment of federal inaction. And so if you could talk about a little bit about what your groups have done and your own thoughts about when you decide, hey, we need to do something about this. And maybe I'll start with Peter and sort of work right to left.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Everybody wait.
Yeah.
Let's try that one more time. Good morning. Excellent. I think the answer for La Casa de Pedro is very different because we were founded out of community rebellion. So we've been in this fight for 50 plus years. And I don't think, even though it started with and I think one of the things to impart, even though it started with the Puerto Rican community, the xenophobia, the hate, the vitriol was always there, right? So the legal versus illegal is part of this conversation. It doesn't make any difference. As soon as I start speaking Spanish, the question is, wait, how do you learn Spanish, right? So again, I think it's been But we're the gateway to the American dream, right? It's focused on immigrants want to learn English. Newsflash, right? Immigrants work. Newsflash, right? So I think that's the thing that, in spite of everything this country has done to challenge the American dream, to shrink the American dream, at the local level, that dream hasn't changed. People come to us in abject poverty. So 33% of our current clients prefer not to say what their immigration status is. 90% of our population is foreign born. No, sorry, 78% of our population is foreign born. 47% of our population receives zero government assistance. Let me say that again. And 90% of our population makes less than $50,000 a year. And in spite of that, the American dream happens. So the answer is we just have to keep grinding, we have to keep working, and we have to beat the hell out of those states that don't welcome. And I think that's the most important part of this, right? The only way we're gonna win this is by beating them and by showing that the American dream is still big and alive.
Good morning, everybody. That was so much weaker for me. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. I'm a managing attorney. I'm an professor. But what I'll say is I came to this work, which I think is important, sort of in college, learning about Latin America in the national period and sort of the US role in formulating or affecting governments in Latin America. And as I got older and then pursued law school with the intent to become a nonprofit attorney, I wasn't sure exactly, where my efforts would make the greatest difference. In conversations with my dad, who was an immigrant from Guatemala, he came here in the '60s through a worker program where his mom was able to petition for him. And there is a very strong sense from immigrants in his generation that immigration has not changed in this country, and that the process they went through is a mirror image of what the process looks like today, which is not true. There were very restrictive laws passed in 1986, right? The Immigrant Reform and Control Act, and then again, IRA in 1996, which introduced many grounds of inadmissibility and expanded grounds of portability. Introduce things like the 3- and 10-year bar, which are very significant consequences. So we're on the same page. If someone is residing in the United States as an adult over the age of 18 for a period of 6 months or fewer without, or I should say, 180 days, but less than 1 year, and then they depart the United States, they are barred from reentry or accessing any sort of benefit for 3 years. If they leave the country after being in the United States as an adult for more than 1 year, they are barred for 10 years. And so this has been a critical reason why so many people, despite having a viable petition, right, through an employer or through a loved one, they can't access that petition because they are inadmissible, which means they can't receive a green card in the United States because of their history. There's a solution to that, right? They leave the United States in the consular process, but these bars make it so that once you depart the US, you can't re-enter for 3 or 10 years without a specialized waiver, which is very difficult to get, especially without consular. And so the work that I do in RICAP is representing individuals and being in the trenches, so to speak. I have a very intimate relationship with how the immigration system has torn apart families, has crushed the dreams of the students who come to Rutgers that hopefully we can work to solve. But the reality is the immigration system is dysfunctional, and there is not always something that RICAP can do to change whether someone will be able to access benefit, because there are roads that lead to nowhere. I think that a really critical part of working at RICAP is engaging in conversations like this, because so many people are unfamiliar with the nature of the immigration system and how things have changed. And wherever I have an opportunity to share a little bit about the realities of immigration, it's a wonderful opportunity. I think I mean, I guess I'll stop there. Five more questions, but one of the most important things that I think RICAP does is to just take opportunities to basically engage in conversation around how we can problem solve, right? Where the federal government is dysfunctional and there hasn't been change, we figure out what we can do here at the university or at the state level to create a more humane and dignified existence for individuals who are currently facing obstacles. One other thing that I'll just say is a lot of people will comment. That people who violate immigration laws, right, this term, don't want to say, so I won't, you know, there's an unkind term for people who are undocumented in the United States. And there are many people who violate civil laws in the United States, and we don't tag them as illegals. So if you're looking for a reason not to use the term illegal, I would say, you know, we call people who have violated tax laws illegals, we call people who violate any other civil law illegal. Just because something is the law does not mean that it's just or right. I'll remind everyone in this room that there was a time where slavery was lawful, right? People were escaped slaves. Chinese exclusion was lawful. We returned U.S. citizens of Japanese descent. There were many times where politics and popular nationalism take control of the steering wheel in the United States. But it's these sorts of conversations about the human component that are how we overcome those challenges. And so that's one really important sort of message I just want to share, because it's so easy for people to blame immigrants for the situation, when really we don't have a system that is actually designed to promote even our own immigration interests. Like many things, I don't want to get too political, but like many things, there are special interests with lots of dollars, and those are really the priorities of, I think, many of our policies that are based on political momentum.
I don't know what happened to this. I think it doesn't want me to talk.
I didn't know.
Well, my colleagues here have, I think, said it all, but so let me come at it from two directions to answer or to address your question. One is, I have worked, and so many of us have worked for decades on how universities and the engines of the public good can really be at the crux of social mobility. I mean, there's a whole set of people in this room, all of whom are dedicated to exactly that. So I look around and I ask colleagues, if you're espousing the notion that universities are public goods and dedicated to social mobility, how in the world can you not be committed to a huge, expansive talent pool of immigrant origin, whether undocumented, whether children of undocumented, whether refugees? How can you not be committed to this expansive talent? And I think that's really a central question for us all to ask. It is not the case that we, as engines of social mobility, can fulfill that dream unless we figure out a way to protect, to enroll, to make sure people succeed, to make sure there's a pathway to a productive life. We simply can't succeed. There are lots of complications that we can't succeed in doing our duty unless we embrace it. I'm looking out at Chris Akins, unless we embrace the huge incarcerated population. How can we say that we care about social mobility? One easiest way to look at that is to just look at the demographics. You know, higher ed leaders constantly want to talk about the enrollment. You know what the enrollment curve is?
all the white kids are shrinking. And all the rest, fabulous talent, is actually expanding. I rest my head. I mean, you know, we can all come at this, as we all do, from a social justice perspective. But if you gotta convince people out there, which is hard to do, take a business perspective. Who are the consumers of the future? Who are the students of the future? Who are the innovators? And if we keep building walls around opportunity, as Gary Orville would say, for that expanding talent pool, this country goes nowhere. No. So that's one, I would say. The other half, what I would say, because I think it's really important to humanize this question, is look inside yourself. Where did you come from? I came from immigrant grandparents who fled oppression at age 14 and 15 and came to Ellis Island and came to Brooklyn and birthed my father in a tenement on a kitchen table. And he went to City College of New York as the only person in a wide set of families to ever go to college. I think of Rutgers-Newark as that place. That's what we're about. But that's what this country has supposedly been about. It's what the folks that Pete knows what they're basically about, right? That's what opportunity is. And from my perspective, issues of immigration, migration, refugee displacement, it's all about opportunity at the end of the day. And we're either going to be a place of opportunity or we're going to build walls. Take your pick. Now, that may sound a little dramatic, but I think this country has come to that point. I think we have answered that question. Are we a place of opportunity? Or are we a place of built walls?
We can get to that in a second. I feel like the three panelists are being humble here. You know, I did want to highlight some of the achievements, some of the great ways they are supporting our students and students in our community. So we can get to that. But I actually think you know, Nancy brings up a really important point, right? We're at, in some ways, a real crossroads nationally, maybe even globally, one part, right? Around the question of immigration and the way in which Nancy is, you know, beautifully puts it, right? We can be a place of borders, or we could be a place of opportunities, right? It's sort of the way in which Nancy is framing it. So, you know, that important, of course, that question is important, but given that the elections are right around the corner, right? Unfortunately, in some ways, the question is, you know, because it does seem like public opinion has been trending in the other direction as far as toward, you know, it's complicated, but right, and maybe one can really argue, again, not to get too political, there's a particular party that has really trended. I mean, when your mainstream policy for immigration is, you know, military intervention in Mexico, like you've really, you know, you've really gone off the tracks. But I guess the question here is then, how do we start moving the conversation and moving sort of public opinion to, right? I mean, you do give an example, like we need to humanize the issue, right? And maybe that's the way to go. But the question now is like, how do we shift public opinion and move it in such a way that we can, live out the kind of supposed ideals of opportunity, the American dream, and so forth, right? And so I guess my question to the three panelists, like, what does that look like? What do we need to be doing to be pushing the conversation in that direction and moving the needle of public opinion toward opportunities and humanizing immigrants?
I'll start briefly and pass to the end. I want to argue that we pay way too much attention to the headlines when we assess where the public's voice really is. And I have a couple of examples that counter that. In 2017, a group of us formed what we call the President's Alliance on Immigration and Higher Education. There were like 5 presidents. Chancellor. We now have over 550 college and university presidents and chancellors across 43 states, DC and Puerto Rico, who actively signed on to commit to have their institutions work for immigration reform, work to welcome refugee students, work to advocate and file amicus briefs, as in the DACA case, work at the state level and the local level to do things like we've done in New Jersey, to advocate for in-state tuition, to advocate for financial aid, to advocate for driver's licenses, to advocate for work and licensure, for professional license for undocumented and immigrant origin individuals. If the public opinion was so counter to immigrant opportunity, to an immigrant opportunity agenda, would we really have that many leaders of higher education actually signing on, filing briefs, testifying in front of the I just worry that we read the headlines and we buy it. Now, that's not to underplay the destructive influence of DeSantis and Abbott and others who are clearly catching those headlines. Right? No question, if you're in Florida or Texas, things are really bad. But I just don't want to give up on the notion that actually the public opinion is entirely counter to opportunity structures for individuals. That's on the one. The other thing I would say relative to how you think that Kornel is that we've got, and I go back to humor, we've got to tell the stories. It's what our colleagues here do. Newest Americans, the Story Plus, Humanities Action. You've got to have people walking in the shoes of other people. Because when you build that base, it spreads. When you can actually imagine that you have some similar connections somewhere in your own community or history, it's much harder to bind the divisive rhetoric and much easier to get people to commit. Now, we're lucky in a state like New Jersey, relatively. We can't say the word reparations, but other than that, we're relatively lucky. And we're not in a state like Florida. So I don't want to be Pollyanna. But on the other hand, we are in a place where we can galvanize that local voice to actually have ripple effects and make a difference. State of Massachusetts just passed a great set of policies on support for immigrant students. State of Maryland, right near that dysfunctional Congress, right across, right? So I'm not giving up on the public. The courts clearly aren't representing the public in that way. And Congress is dysfunctional, although we actually came very close to having cinema and Tillis of all people pass a bipartisan agreement. And then so
I took out my phone to write some notes while you were speaking, because I was like, oh, I gotta say something about that, and that, and that. So a few years back, I enrolled in improv class, thinking it would help with, trial litigation, things like that. But there's a really valuable lesson there that I want to apply to this conversation. And it's this notion of you can never stop the momentum of good ideas. So, but is this allowed? And you can say yes, and this additional thought. And so when I think about immigration, for me, I think that, yes, definitely want to share, build a narrative around what immigrants' lives in the United States are like, what they have been. But this notion that the United States is a benevolent savior that immigrants come to and give of the United States has to give of its limited lifeboat resources to these people, right, who will not contribute to the United States. It's just ridiculous. And I think that is what has been so well done over the past greater part of the century. And so it is not enough, in my view, to say, who are we as a nation? Shouldn't we want to be benevolent folks are welcoming refugees? Yes. And it is good economics to have a healthy migration system, right? In a global economy where many nations, very wealthy nations, have shrinking populations, right? The United States in the last 3 years, I think, has first time not had a positive growth rate. And so we ask ourselves, if we want to bring labor back to the United States, how does this math add up? Unless there's a false narrative, right? And so I don't mean to say that there is a worthy, unworthy sort of immigrant paradigm that we should look to, but I think that we can be a bit small-minded in thinking of what this issue really represents. And certainly we want to be good actors that act within the identity that we have cultivated over the past 200 plus years. But also, this nation was built on shrewd thinking, scrappy immigrants, and some really horrible history. And this is an opportunity to identify an issue that has gone on for a long time. And we think about how far sort of the sides are that we don't even really, everyone sort of chuckles off this notion of comprehensive immigration reform. Like, let's just settle for a dream bill, because that's the only realistic option. And I think I would charge this audience with thinking about, why is that the only realistic option? Why have we allowed this conversation to be so much about the United States being of service to the immigrant population, instead of the narrative being to highlight all of the amazing contributions? Yes, in art, yes, there are some wonderful folks, but also just the everyday workers who build our roads, who fill our grocery stores with food that we have come, there are these movements, Day Without an Immigrant, where, we for a day, for a couple of days, we get a sense of what it would be like if immigrants stopped working, right? And I just think that we have to reframe this conversation to be more than just human rights conversation. Yeah, I'm not saying that it's not very important, or that we should not feel some sense of responsibility based on that, but also. For anyone who's ever talked to a therapist, what's your love language, right? We got to talk to people in the way that they can hear what we're saying. And I think that many of the messages around human rights fall on deaf ears. People will say to people, why us? Why do we have to be the ones to be the world's, refuge? And that's a fair question. I have answers for that are based on the United Nations Convention on Refugees. And anyway, but also I think it's also a matter of like there is lots of opportunity in the United States. This notion that there isn't is false. We know that from ITIN numbers that immigrants who cannot access benefits are paying into all of our tax systems at the federal level, at the state level. This notion that immigrants are taking is just such a false narrative that is permitted to sort of continue in the United States. And I think that, so many times that I hear, we're in a reactive position in the immigrant service space where it's like a crisis comes up and what can we do? And then it's like, we should do something good for people. But really it's like, we should be proactively thinking about how we can change this conversation. And the United States has this notion of the laboratory of the states. And clearly the federal government is not in a place where they're prepared to resolve this problem. And so I think we have to think locally about how we can demonstrate state power, what we want from this country. In New Jersey and California are great examples of this. There are many great examples. Since we're in New Jersey, I will just say that, we have in-state tuition, regardless of lawful presence, access to state-based financial aid. You still have to be a resident of New Jersey. That hoops are even more narrow, right? So it's not like individuals are getting, free aid that residents before these laws were unable to get. Also, driver's license for all, right, is a notion that is not about immigration, right? If you think about, when you're in an accident in New Jersey, and it could be, a minor accident, it could be an expensive accident, but if the other driver is not insured, and you only have a limited amount of insurance, you can't get blood from a stone or money from an empty bank account. And so allowing individuals to have driver's licenses, register their vehicles, access insurance, makes everybody on the road safe, right? Think about your children that are getting on the road. You want them to have access to whatever resource they need if there's an accident. And so as a state, we took a position to say, the federal government has made this sort of a position on immigration very stagnant, but we have real issues at the local level that we have the power to address. And so we have. Another one that is really relevant is vocational licensing, which we'll circle back to later in this conversation. I'm so sure because we're doing work on this and research on this now. But I just think that vocational licenses are just another way to promote opportunity, right, outside and in spaces that are not sort of federally preemptive, or the field has not been built because federal immigration doesn't reach into subcontracting law. It really isn't. It goes so far as to build a space in terms of employer-employee relationships. But there's a reason why there aren't laws that can invest money or build businesses in this country, and that's because we want them, right? And so I just think that states are in a position to really represent the different sort of facets of the immigrant experience, elevate on the local level, what businesses immigrants create, what spaces they fill, right? The public goods that are a direct result of just reaching towards equitable access at the state level to resources. If enough states, sort of follow the suit of states like ours, there will be so much data that shows that there's like a net positive result when we promote integration, when we do not build walls. And I really believe that where we're positioned as a premier institution in the state of New Jersey is to lead this sort of next frontier in vocational licensing, because we have a responsibility with students that we have been encouraging to attend Rutgers, right? And we have a lot of influence, right, through our our professional, sort of position, but also the alum and the students that come through Rutgers. And I really do believe that, when states can demonstrate, like, in an organized fashion, sort of all of the net positive influence that immigrants make through sort of laws that do not conflict with the federal position, we will have the tools we need to tell the story that will move the nation, right? Like, this is how things like DOMA, right? So there's, and get older all the time. And this was so cutting edge, right? In 2007, marriage between one man and one woman, and states, changed their state laws. And for a long time, this didn't change things about the federal law and to file federal taxes as a married couple. But when enough states took the position that it was not about one man and one woman, then the federal government was like, okay, we hear you, we will repeal it, right? And I think there's a similar sort of process that we followed, because we know that when we just go straight to the federal level, it just hasn't made a difference. And I don't want to say that we shouldn't pursue a dream. I wanted to say something about the dream bill. I have mixed feelings about this. Like, I want a dream bill, but also I think what we have all observed is every time there's a little pressure released from the situation, it makes it so that everybody else outside of that small opportunity suffers for a long period of time. So I think we still have to pursue things at the federal level, but we have to be doing this local work, because if we don't, then we really increase the risk that by taking federal action, we supplant opportunity for future generations.
I guess I'm supposed to say something. Check that. All right, so let me try to put a pin on this and make three major points, and I'll start right off the bat with the controversy, just because I'm not beholden to Rutgers at all, right? You got to change the metrics. I don't know what your university president thought. Y'all got to tell him that. Can I get an amen?
Amen.
Y'all need to speak. The metrics have to change. And when it's working, take those metrics and apply it to where it isn't working. We have to be the voice for that. We can't sit here and let that happen. It scares the living crap out of me what she's going to do if she does leave in June, because then she won't have any handcuffs on. Because I don't know what that Nancy's going to look like. But we have an opportunity to always speak truth to power, and we know that there are OGs in the room. We have to give them their flowers while they're alive and present and with us. So that's first, because it's about metrics, it's about outcomes, it's about showing that things are working. This experiment works. And not just for brown people, not just for Black people, but for Muslim people, for trans people, for everybody. The second piece to this is maybe a little bit of, I got to try to, amongst educators, do a little educating myself. And it speaks to some of the things you guys were saying. So anybody know how long how long high school equivalency has been offered in Spanish in this country? Give me a guess. Shout out some years. 20 years? Somebody else? 0? 10? Well over 100 years, mi gente. You know why? Anybody want to try to guess? Think about what was going on about 107 years ago. The history teacher, let's see if the history professor. What was this little thing going on in the world about 107, 108 years ago? World War I. So guess what our government, the benevolent government, realized? Right? Wait, we just colonized this whole little island called Puerto Rico. And we don't have enough white people who want to go to war. Right? So this country has proven It seeks the opportunities and will leverage it, and immigration leverages and makes this country stronger. You know, to personalize it for myself, when I was down in Tom's River, right, I had one of our folks, she was one of the porters, and I did the I-10 thing. We got petitions, well, 2 years later, I mean, she was exhausted, falling on the floor. We were like, Carmen, what's going on? Well, she got certified to be a phlebotomist. So she was in such high demand that she was working like 80 hours a week as a phlebotomist, because guess what? We don't have enough of those here in this country either. This is a labor issue. When you look at 11, 10, 20, whatever, 20 million, a workforce that we have readily available to us that can help fund Social Security, right? This is another opportunity. To your direct question, start putting economics behind this answer. I'm the social service guy. I know the social service answer ain't working. We got to put economics and dollars behind this. And the last piece of this from a research perspective, and I forget which one of you triggered this thought in me, is if we don't do something about trauma in this country and understanding how trauma informs public opinion, ball game's over. I think we constantly seek to transpose that trauma onto somebody else. Whether it's a teenager who becomes pregnant, whether it's someone who's trans, whatever it is, we just transfer this trauma onto others. And how do we get us to stop and deal with trauma effectively from a public health crisis perspective, right? In terms of that will change the needle and move the needle on a lot of these conversations.
You all. I'm gonna try to insert Roberto Gonzalez in here, even though he can't be with us. So I did ask him, as many of you, I asked him a question. As many of you know, about a little over a week ago, the district court in Southern Texas, the go-to court for the right, it seems, ruled that the Biden's DACA program is illegal, right? Which means now that it will almost certainly reappear and be adjudicated by the Supreme Court, probably sometime in the spring. So given Roberto is a legal expert and has kept up with this, and obviously I can also ask Jason and the other panelists here, but let me just give you Roberto Gonzalez's thoughts about the ruling and what is likely to happen when it reaches the Supreme Court. He writes, given Judge Hanson's ruling last week, DACA is very likely on a collision course with the Supreme Court, probably late spring 2024. Given the composition of the court and some of its recent decisions, there is good reason for advocates to anticipate a negative outcome. Even in the face of DACA's overwhelming success as a policy of immigrant integration and economic development. So the question becomes, what to do in anticipation of DACA's potential termination? Congress has had 11 years to do something and it has been unable to move the needle on immigration. It has been 22 years since the introduction of the DREAM Act during this time. As lawmaking on immigration has moved to state, county, and municipal levels, we've seen different responses shaped by diverging politics in different locales. States have completed DACA by offering eligibility to driver's licenses, and while some state higher ed systems have excluded undocumented students, some states have opened up opportunities in state opportunities for DACA beneficiaries. Higher ed campuses and national scholarship programs have also made inroads in providing support to students covered by DACA. But because many of these supports are tied to DACA, they will likely go away if DACA is terminated. An important policy intervention at the local level would be to de-link these benefits and support from DACA status. Seems really key. It will also be incumbent upon local institutions and foundations that fund them to step up their level of support, much like the settlement house movement, to offer legal services, mental health support, and wraparound services for young people and their families. This could look like the worst kind of expulsion from jobs, higher education programs, residencies that will no longer be affordable, an acquired and earned standard of living, and perhaps also from the country at a massive scale. And there will be great need from community. There will be great need from communities. To the American public, it will be important to tell the story of DACA's success and Congress's failure, to shine a bright light on it, and to push hard for broader and more permanent relief.
Can I qualify that statement?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I just want to say that the University of Pennsylvania is in Philadelphia, and I live in Philadelphia, and Pennsylvania is an example of a state where there has been almost no positive movement, sort of immigrant, like local immigrants. I want to just juxtapose that to the state of New Jersey, where many of the state pieces of legislation are not actually tied to DACA status. We've had some, I guess, within our institution, but we have even moved to, and Nancy, I'm sure, can speak more to this. Chancellor Cantor, how do I call you? But Nancy can speak more to this about how we have delinked some of these that originally did have DACA connections. But in many states, there are already models that do exist. But the problem is these in more middle of the road states, the critical piece of the negotiation has been that they're better to DACA specifically. So I think we'll wait to see sort of how these states respond. I also just want to think so much about DACA litigation. I feel like we should call what DACA is now legacy. Because the reality is DACA has been terminated for years. And people have been ineligible to enroll in the program effectively since 2017, barring a few hundred that made it through in a short window of time in early 2021, between the end of the decision and the decision that came down from just dating the first case. And so, just so that we're all very clear, the lack of action on a policy and legislative level is definitely tied to the language we use and the narrative we tell. And this idea that DACA is a lie is a farce, right? The legacy of DACA persists because there is a reliance interest, not only for the students or young people who have DACA, who may now be middle-aged people, some of them, but also their employers, their US citizen children, people who hold their mortgages, right? There's such a ripple effect that comes from this legacy DACA population. But make no mistake that freshmen and sophomores that are coming to Rutgers-Newark, that are in our community colleges, have just never had an opportunity to pursue something like that. So for them, it's terminated, right? And I just want to make sure that that is something we all appreciate, because the population that was DACA recipients, roughly 700,000, has dwindled, because the ability to keep DACA has also been constrained.
Just there, one addendum to this really helpful point. Even in a great state like New Jersey, as a true New Yorker, I never thought I'd say that. Even in a great state like New Jersey, great with respect to these policies, which are not tied to DACA, so there are restrictions on some of these policies that we ought to, and you ought to be fighting to change. Two examples that I will give have to do with in-state tuition and financial aid, which are absolutely critical. And he is right, we don't tie that to DACA at all. It's New Jersey Dreamer legislation. On the other hand, though, to get for an undocumented student, DACA or not, to get in-state financial aid and to in-state tuition, you have to have been in residence at a New Jersey high school for 3 years. That is a huge barrier. And we are finding that we have to scurry. We team up with Dream.us, for example, nationally, foundation to try to get, we use our own scholarship money, we do all kinds of things. Because that 3-year window is a long time to have imagined that all the students in New Jersey. The data are really stunning. I mean, 4,000 New Jerseyans graduate from high school every year who are immigrant origin. 4,000, that's a lot of students. And not all of them have been in a school for 3 years in New Jersey. So that's one. Related to that, refugees, and the State Department has just done a new program for a welcome corps for welcoming refugees, asylum seekers, displaced people into universities and colleges. But you have to get in-state tuition, you will have to have been in state for a full year. That's going to be a real block because institutions like ours that are not the wealthy owning institutions are going to have to figure out ways to support that first year before the refugee is eligible for state and federal aid. So those may sound very technical and specific, but actually the larger point I want to make is very related to what I think both people have said, and that is, let's not be hoodwinked by the national context. Let's do what good labor unions do. Let's do what good activists do. You start locally and you spread. The Starbucks unionization, just to take an analogy, they didn't go sit in Howard Schultz's, they didn't go sit in his office. They sat in the local Starbucks and they went from there. So let's think about advocacy for immigrants and refugees, migrants as being about a local effort that then spreads from there. And specifically tie it, as just said, to the economics of contributions. Because then you can get partners locally and statewide you would never have imagined. It's, by the way, exactly the same argument that when we were defending affirmative action that is now dead at the University of Michigan a gazillion years ago, we made the argument that you had to show in every instance locally the opportunity that would be built if you took race conscious admissions to account. That you couldn't count on some national legislation. You had to show it local. And that's where I come back, though, to telling the stories. We can tell you stories that are just, that just immediately speak to both the positive talent and the trauma that is experienced on the ground. And when you do that, you don't affect national policy, but you do affect local policy.
So I want
So
to say.
can I brag?
Yeah, you want to.
I gotta sell the Casa, right? So you missed the segue there, you know, you haven't seen us ham and egg before, so.
I'm new here.
Right, yeah. So January 1st, right, an example not tied to doc, anything else, right? Governor Murphy allowed our undocumented neighbors to enroll in NJ Family Care. It was very. I'll be more in a second. So of course that came by in this political climate, crickets, nothing happened. I leaned on our team and said, well, we're gonna do a press conference. If he ain't doing it, I'm doing it, right? Funny thing is, somehow, I guess he found out, so he decided to finally do a press conference. We did a press conference 4 days later and had our great majority leader, Teresa Ruiz, there, right, and advocates from across the state. They had said there was about 16,000 people eligible. La Casa enrolled 1,200 in about 10 weeks. Well, say that again, 1,200 in 10 weeks. Again, we had Horizon there, we had WellCare there, we had, and you know what? Again, this is not benevolence. Like I told both of them, if y'all hosted this, nobody would show up. When trusted community agencies show up and put their name on something, we show up and mobilize, right? There's a saying that says all politics is local. I also think that's the same thing for progress and change, right? The Fight for 15 failed nationally, but how many places all over the country has the Fight for 15 won, right? And it's going to become the Fight for 20, right? So I think, you know what, one of the challenges, right? I'm not a lawyer, but I think one of the great things that the law does is make us find a way in spite of it. And I think that's ultimately the driver, that the law will come, but we got to show that we really want it. So I think that's just an example of one of the things, right, that we were able to do. You know, I had a family come to us Friday night, 24, 23, 20, and 4 years old. Right, we're running around trying to give them food. They're like, I don't want food, I want a job. Give my daughter the food. Right? They had walked or come here from Columbia. So for them to walk from Montclair to Lower Broadway was nothing. Probably the safest walk they had. Right? And that's the reality of what the immigrant story is and what we're facing. And again, in my mind, I'm like, I'd hire all three of them if I could. Tomorrow, because that's what we need to mobilize and to institutionalize, quote unquote, institutionalize change. Wow, that's really a bad plug.
All right, I want to save some time, maybe the last 15 minutes for questions from the audience to our panelists. Does someone have the mic? Do you just raise your hand? Very much. Right, I think this is. All right, if you raise your hand, Mihan will come to you with the mic, and then if you can speak into the mic with your question. You can just identify yourself very briefly.
Hello to our wonderful panelists who have given us so much food for thought and inspiration this morning. My name is Erica Fugger, and I'm a PhD candidate in American Studies here at Rutgers-Newark. Thank you. And my question relates to the theme today of institutionalizing change. Each of you and each of us here in this room are all individuals working within our institutions, often hoping to create positive change. But in the end, we are all simply individuals, no matter how much power or influence we wield within those institutions. So I'm wondering how each of you helps ensure that after you've transitioned out of your current roles, such as your upcoming departure, Chancellor Cantor from Rutgers-Newark, who I'm sure that many in this room are not happy about. How do you ensure that your institutions remain committed to supporting new generations of migrants and immigrants? How do we collectively create sustainable programs and protections so that rights and access to opportunities for first-generation students and their families are not eroded through changes in politics and administrations? As Chancellor Cantor said, these amazing young people are the future of our country. So to wrap up, how do we continue to actually challenge these structural oppressions within our country through our public institutions in New Jersey, through the local networks, collaborators, and coalitions we build? Thank you so much.
I'll just take a quick start and then the experts should pile. So I think you just said beautifully at the end of what you asked, exactly how we do it. I mean, no individual makes this stuff happen. We always talk in our group about what we call a shared equity leadership model. And leadership, that's in quotes. Everybody in this room is a leader. There is no way that this work, I mean, I've been here for 10 years and watched and advocated and worked with groups to get the laws we've talked about today in New Jersey. None of that happened because individuals, even those in power, do it alone. So I just can't, I mean, that sounds like an easy answer, but it's really, really true. You know, I guess I've mentioned this too many times today, but I go back to the labor movement of the early century. And, you know, collective organizing is exactly what will make change. But what's interesting in universities, at least, and I'll just speak for institutionalizing it, universities, is that the organizing has to be within the different buckets of the institution. So there have to be change agents across the institution that are empowered. It just can't be a collective to the side of the actual institutional structure. And one of the things that I've always tried to pay attention to is who are the change agents on the ground in the different departments, in the different staff units, in the different student groups, who are, you know, we have a fabulous RISE group for our undocumented students. Are any of RISE students here today? Yay! They are pushing us, or at least Thomas and I have just had endless conversations about the experiences that the RISE students are telling us that need to be changed. Like we need to get to Rutgers Biomedical Health System and explain to their people that they can actually give volunteer positions and even do and get to entrepreneurs and say, you can hire our undocumented students as contract, for example. We have to have people all across the institution, from student voices, the faculty to staff, and not just count on it being top down in any specific way. Having said that, top down matters too, because if those people on the ground are not rewarded and supported, then the change doesn't happen. I mean, this is sort of simple, right? But it's hard to actually do. So, especially I think in this arena, you know, we have to really make sure that the collective is reaching into all the spaces and not just assume that it's a group off to its side by itself. And then the other quick thing I would say is that there is nothing more powerful to change a university than the outside-in perspective of the collective in the community that then voices the ways in which the institution is or isn't reaching for opportunity. So it's not coincidental that La Casa's out there doing what they're doing and teaming at various ways with us and with others. That kind of ripple effect is huge.
Right, you know, and I want to piggyback to, it goes back to the whole, these conversations we've had about practice informing scholarship and scholarship informing practice, right? Unfortunately, scholarship is really the proverbial tree in the forest that nobody hears, right? And I hate to be overly technical about this, right? But this, there has to be some reform in the IRB process, to say, what are you gonna do with your research and how is it gonna impact community? And who are you gonna partner with once you've completed that research or that dissertation there, PhD candidate? I think we really gotta challenge that, because I need help, right, with scholarship. Because we're the best doers in the world, but we're running around doing, and just that marriage, I think, is a concrete step that really needs to happen if we're gonna do the whole institutionalized change thing.
So I have two comments. One is sort of at the university level. I think that Nancy, you have done a great job. Like, I would not be here, but for Nancy really advocating across the university to fund RICAP. And I do want to shout out the professors, Professor Randy Mandelbaum, Professor Anju Gupta, Professor Joanne Goddison at the law school, who created a proposal for this project, and Nancy championed at the executive level. That is one of many things that she has done. So as much as I still do not believe or accept that Nancy will not be a summer, I do know that there are many people who carry Nancy's legacy and will figure out how to keep our projects and programs. So I did have a thought when I heard the news. No, what does this mean for like all the great work we've done? And so that's, I mean, I was already leading this way, but it did create a more urgent sense that we need to now approach the state, right? And I think that all of the pieces have been sort of laid in place over the last decade, where the state of New Jersey is, encouraging people regardless of lawful presence to attend institutions of higher education. We're, aiding with money, taking money from these young people. We're preparing them for careers, but they don't have work authorization in every case, and that is a significant obstacle that I think not only does Rutgers need to sort of, come to terms with, right? What are we doing to make sure that these students can maximize the use of their degree? But also on the state level, like, what is our end, right? We now have this vocational licensing bill that promotes like a higher likelihood that individuals could start their own business and still with a license, a vocational license or a professional license, earn an income. But there are still issues, right, where many people don't want to have to go through special hoops, right? If there is a forum of getting your status resolved, I think that should be our first sort of effort as a state, right? And then if there is not an option, then we have this other path that still promotes the public welfare of the state of New Jersey. And so when I think of institutionalized change, because I have represented many people and I've changed their lives and they've changed mine, but it does feel like a grain of sand, right? And I thought a lot about what we can do to sort of expand our reach. And one thing that comes up is, right, with different schools after the vocational licensing bill, how a student comes to me and says, I was told I can't, be admitted to this nursing school or that, or I was told I can't do this social work program. And then I have to go to the dean of that school, have a conversation about the law, and then if they want to talk to the board of licensing, we have to join that conversation. And they're one-off resolutions. So RICAP has partnered with the Center for Immigration Law, Policy and Justice, and we've been in conversations with Nate Road, Erica Martinez, who's a great advocate in the space. And we are now basically conducting open public records research around the implementation of this vocational licensing bill that has, been implemented since 2020. And whether or not the bill delivers on its promise. And I don't know what the answer will be, but anecdotally from students that they have struggled to access these licenses after this bill has come into effect, because when they go through the portals, it asks for a social security number, it doesn't have one, it tells them that their information will be shared with the federal government, it doesn't say like explicitly what information, why. There are a number of things that just still create barriers, and it's not clear who to contact. That I think there's work to be done to expand the reach and access through the vocational licensing. But I think also with this is sort of, we have pieces at the beginning and we have pieces at the end, but really we should be thinking about how we have universal representation for folks in detention. And these are sort of public goods for families that are residents of the state of New Jersey. Similarly, I think it would make sense for there to be like the universal access to immigration counsel in higher education. If we are encouraging, inviting students into these spaces, we don't want to become predatory institutions. We have a responsibility to deliver on what we're selling, and the state is our partner. And so there are many forms of relief that are time sensitive, age based, and getting into partnership with community colleges, expanding the reach of RICAP or programs like RICAP. And there are so many students that I have met that if I had met sooner, I could have gotten a permanent residence in the United States. But now I can't. And so I think about what we need to do, sort of, and it's like we have to reach young people where they're at and solve the problems when we can. And I think we've skipped over this piece of we have the space, but we can't just rest on our laurels, like pat ourselves on the back. I work with students every day that live with constant uncertainty, even if they have DACA or if they have some plan. Things could change, right? And I think the most secure path forward is to have lawful status in the United States. I think everybody wants that, who does not have it. But there are reasons why they can't access it. And the consequences in immigration are akin to the consequences of criminal law, but because it's civil, there is no right to counsel unless you can afford one. The system is very complicated. I mean, USCIS works for the president, right? The judges in immigration courts are under the president. Prosecutors in immigration court are under the president. This is not part of the court where there's a fair system that is akin to the Article 3 court system. Like there are some protections that you get to, but really the system is not just, and that's the notion of social justice, right? We fill the gap with nonprofit lawyers and like grants to represent people so they can get a fair shake under the law. So why not bring that into our educational spaces where we are promoting equity, right? Chancellor Cantor mentioned that, universities are spaces for the public good. And I think when we bring young people in, equity should be our priority. When you think about diversity, really diversity is not, it's not about having people who are just represented. It's about recognizing the unequal access to resources and opportunity that people come to us with and trying to control for those and to have an equal experience as much as we can deliver higher.
Right, and sorry, but I'm gonna end it there due to time constraints. Can you join me in thanking our wonderful panelists? For a second, I am going to invite my dear colleague Charles Payne up to the podium to give a tribute.
All right, let's hope that's my last couple for the day. Okay. It would be completely inappropriate if we're talking about institutionalized change. If we didn't acknowledge before we break up the distinct, the unique, the deeply impactful leadership, been referred to several times, that Nancy Cantor and the impact she has had on institutionalized change on this campus. I'm not even gonna look at her because she's trying to make me shut up. And I'm not gonna. This time I'm gonna. So everybody knows about the U.S. News and World Report yesterday. Rutgers-Newark has moved up substantially in direct. To be honest, that was just old news if you were paying attention. Right? Just in August, Washington Monthly, which sees itself as the opposite of U.S. News and World Report. They work in the other side of the street. Concluded that Rutgers-Newark ranks in the top 10 for both social mobility and best bang for the buck among all schools in the US of A. Hold on, folks, just hold on. He's just getting started. Third Way, National Policy Think Tank Research Organization ranks Rutgers-Newark 17th nationally. I think they used a 2000 campus sample. 17th nationally for economic mobility, by which they mean, quote, helping students, this is such important language, not only access college, but also to get across the finish line to reap the benefits of a post-secondary credential, right? It ain't who do that in. Who's got a job 10 years later on, right? That's what's happening. 17th in the nation, right? That was again old news too, right? Because the prior year, Georgetown Center on Education and the Workforce included the Rutgers-Newark ranked first in the nation among institutions with a high percentage of low-income students on return for their investment in college. Right? So my complete irrepressible colleague Peter was talking about the shrinking of the American dream. That's not true, right? Rutgers-Newark under this leadership remains pathway to opportunity. That's my first big point. Don't applaud it. The last year for which I have data, the student body here was a third Latinx, almost 3/4 students of color, 14% Newark residents, 56% women, 62% of freshmen were receiving Pell grants. That's compared to 32% of freshmen for the nation. Very important. Minority students who come here graduate here, okay, and numbers that are substantially better than the national average. So that for the entering freshman class of 2015, if we look at their 6-year graduation rate, who had a degree by 2021, for Black students have run it's 58%. For the nation, it's 46%. Right? Latinx, 62%. Right. That is Rutgers Newark compared to 59% nationally. Rutgers Black women graduate at a rate of 64%. The national rate is 49%. If we just look at public university, right? The 2015 freshman cohort here had a graduation rate of 64% for Black students compared to 40%. 64, right? By the way, I'm not going to go through the 5 pages of bullet points I have. But if anybody wants the whole deal, email Charles that thing. First generation students here are a third of the student body. First generation to go to college. The graduation rate is an astounding 88%, right? Compared to the national rate of 54%. Veteran, U.S. News and World Reports ranked Rutgers-Newark among the top 50 best colleges for veteran. In terms of undocumented students, the point of today's discussion, I don't know if we got actually mentioned anything. That this campus hosted the nation's first college admissions and financial aid fair for undocumented students way back in 2015. I think it was mentioned that Chancellor Cantor is the co-founder of the President's Alliance for Higher Education and Immigration. Was not. We can also say in terms of LGBTQ plus students that one of the first projects funded under Chancellor Seed Grant with all the faculty was the Queer Newark History Project, which has come to be recognized as one of the nation's leading publicly engaged scholarship projects on that set of questions. Rutgers has been a national leader calling attention to and fighting food insecurity among students. The Cantor food pantry distributed nearly 37 tons of food at the height of the pandemic in 2020. RISE was mentioned, but just to be clear, RISE is an initiative that re-engages Newarkers who have some credits from this campus but did not graduate. if you, a lot of us, I think, this point or that point, I just want to, when you put it all together, this is a place for everybody, right? This is a place where there's a chance body, everybody can find his or her tribe. This work is very much, we're going back to the last question about how I'm institutionalized for the long haul. This is a work in progress. This is still present tense work, right? And while the record so far is really amazing, right? There's still work to be done. There's just no question in my mind, going back to Pete's point. The best outcome for us as the Rutgers-Newark community is for the Chancellor to have a chance to move the process of institutionalization up another level. I think there's no doubt about that, right? There's also no doubt to do what she has done so far requires vision, courage, and determination. Right? We should all be grateful that we've had a chance to work on her vision.
One more tribute. Tim Raphael, you come up.
Nancy hates this and I apologize. But attention must be paid in moments like this. And I don't have data. I always go to Charles whenever I need data. I don't have data. There's so many things that one could say about the remarkable achievements that Nancy Cantor has wrought here at Rutgers-Newark. People talk about her vision all the time. People talk about her capacity for affecting change in situations where nobody else before has even managed to contemplate change on the scale and the scope that she engages. People have talked about her courage, and she is incredibly courageous. People have talked about her mad skills in actually being able to implement the vision that she has brought forward. I want to talk for a moment about a term that has been co-opted. It's a term of Dr. King's that has been emanating from New Brunswick for a while now, which has felt like a very hollow expression. Hollow words. Nancy Cantor has created a beloved community here at Rutgers-Newark. Spectacular students and colleagues that are in this room and that are on this campus, and the amazing things that have been achieved by the people who Nancy has empowered, the people whom Nancy has hired, the people whom Nancy has inspired. I look around at the community partners that have become one with Rutgers in a way that they have never been before. I see that Steve Diner is here, and he started this work, right, in making Rutgers a place. Yes, absolutely. Nancy has made this an exemplary public university in the United States. People come here to figure out how to be a stakeholder institution. People come here to figure out how, in a moment after 40 years of systematically defunding public higher education in the United States, you can still do the work in cities around the country. And I just want to say that I have never felt prouder to be part of a community than this community here at Rutgers University in Newark. And that's because of Nancy Cantor. So I'm not prepared to say goodbye, by the way. I don't think this fight is over, but in moments like this, it's good to let the people who we love, the people who we respect, the people who we champion, know how we feel. So we love you, Nancy. And we are amazed by what you've accomplished in the time you've been here.
So all I want to say really is, honestly, it isn't about me, it's about you. This has just been such a privilege to be in a place where real people care about real issues, and where the university isn't some ivory tower in all the praise that means, both physically and symbolically and metaphorically. I mean, when I go back to the notion that it can't be about individuals, and I say that with great gratitude for what Charles and Tim and others have said. I mean, huge gratitude, but it's not me, it's us, it's we, it's you. And just please keep doing it, because the babies deserve it, as Sherry Ann always said. I love you and I love this place.
Please stay, there is food, and there is additional programming between 12 and 2, so please enjoy.